Can we trust the Bible? Today on Made for Glory. One of the objections that I hear often when it comes to whether or not we can trust the words in the Bible is what I would call the telephone objection. You've probably heard this too, where someone says like, well, it's just like the game of telephone. If you tell somebody something like a phrase, a long phrase, and then they repeat it to the next person, they repeat it to the next person, and then eventually it's going to be totally jumbled and totally incoherent at the end. And they say, well, how can we trust these words that have come to us in the Bible? They were passed down just through oral tradition for many years before they were even written down. And I think it's a great question, but maybe something we need to stop and recognize is first and foremost that we are living in a digital culture. I've got my phone here right in front of me. I don't know if you remember the old days back when we used to remember phone numbers. That was part of our culture. I used to have my home phone number, my parents' work number, all my friends' phone numbers. I had all that memorized. Nowadays, I don't have any numbers memorized because it's all in my phone. So we as a culture no longer remember things. Now, ancient cultures didn't have things written down. They had very, very little access to any sort of written materials. So when something was important, they would memorize it. It would be so important and ingrained, they would memorize it. And so their ability to do that, we recognize that our ability to do that when we exercise it actually grows. But when we don't use it, as in our own culture, it goes away. But going back to that, when we talk about the Bible, because a lot of times people say, well, again, this happened so long ago, even the words that were written down, are they accurate? Did they really tell us about Jesus? And the fact is, when you look at what's called textual criticism, really the history of ancient texts and what they tell us about their original authors, but also their source material, that there is no text in all of ancient literature that is better attested to than the Bible. Particularly when we look at the New Testament, that the New Testament has so many copies, tens of thousands of copies, and they actually get closer and closer. So the first books of the New Testament were written really between the year 50 and the year 100 AD. So say Jesus died right around 33 AD, more or less. That it's written in those decades after the death of Jesus. So there's an astounding number of ancient manuscripts. There are actually 5,000 Greek manuscripts, 10,000 Latin, and 9,000 in other languages, which is funny. I have to read it off this because, again, I don't remember things like they did in the olden days. So that's totals over 24,000 manuscripts, which are either complete or partial aspects of the New Testament. Now, that is a greater number than any other ancient document. So Jesus, in a sense, is better tested than any ancient figure. When we talk about Plato, when we talk about Aristotle, when we talk about Caesar even, it doesn't even come close how many times and how many copies of these sources we have that attest to the life of Jesus. So if you think of Homer's Iliad, which happened in 900 BC, that the earliest copy that we have is 400 BC, which was 500 years after the time that the first one was written. Now, no one's saying like that's not really what was written in the Iliad. No one thinks that. But again, when we talk about the New Testament, we have copies that are in the generation just after the original texts were written, and we have thousands and thousands of copies of that. The same thing when it comes to Plato, the works of Plato, that most of his works were about 1,200 years after they were originally written. Now, nobody is contesting whether or not Plato actually wrote, whether or not Plato actually existed, whether we actually have copies of his real words. Everyone knows that that's true, but when it comes to the New Testament, it is better attested than any historical document in the history of the world. That also means that Jesus is a more soundly historically documented person. His existence, his work, his ministry, his words are better tested than any person in all of the ancient world. So we talk about trusting the Bible. Again, that doesn't mean that you necessarily have to believe, but I think it's really important that we counter that argument, counter that thing that kind of flippantly gets tossed out, that we don't even know what Jesus really said. We don't know what Jesus really did. All this stuff was made up afterwards. There's no way they could have known. These are the people that actually knew Jesus and the people that were their actual disciples who wrote down these words, who actually suffered and died for them. And the copies that we have, the evidence that we have for the authenticity of these works is astounding. So just a word of encouragement when we talk about trusting the Bible, and particularly these words of the New Testament, that their historical veracity is well maintained, and I encourage you to take a look at the New Testament today. What's up, YouTube? Thanks so much for watching. Please make sure to like, to comment, also to subscribe, and make sure you click that bell so you can know when we have new videos that are coming out. And if you want to support the great work that's happening, please click on our Patreon button down below. We'd love for you to partner with us. Thanks so much. Have a great day.